Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bobby, and I know a few things about music. I'm strictly a hobbyist. I'd been fiddling around with music for, I don't know, most of my life since I was a kid, on and off again. Lately, for the last 15, 20 years, mostly electronic music. I'm not an expert, not a professional. I just like to make noise. And I think I have some thoughts that maybe you'd like to hear. So, anyway, thanks for tuning in. Maybe I'll do more of these. This seems like a lot of fun. So, today, the point of the video, the mission is to discuss what I've discovered personally to be the best workflow to go from Ableton Live on the computer to the new Push 3 in standalone mode. And this is through quite a bit of trial and error. And, I'm going to do my best here to edit this video so it looks professional. For now, we're going to talk. I'm going to have a forward facing camera. I'm going to slice it and dice it. And I'm going to show you some screen recordings later and then hopefully put it all together in a way that makes sense. And if you like it, you can push all the gizmos on the screen and say thanks in that way. And then we can be friends. Okay, cool. So, how do you go from the computer to standalone? Well, you could just leave everything in MIDI and only use Ableton stock plugins and keep your project within a certain parameter capacity of CPU and then just open it on the push 3 as advertised and play your song and jam live and probably maybe it'll be fine. I don't know. What I've discovered is when I start a project with the standalone push and for a little background, I bought the push 3 when it first was announced. I was like a little delayed in getting it processed, but I still managed to get the first batch. And we immediately went on a work trip, which motivated me to bring the push so that I could really see how it works in this like new standalone mode. And I did have a Machine Plus before that. So, I've had some experience with things that have tried to go from a controller only to a full standalone box. And yeah, so a little bit of, I think, a relevant background to compare. So, anyway, I brought the push to Europe and I played with it on the plane, which was pretty sweet, actually. I played with it like at the resort where my wife was working, doing her thing, and it was pretty sweet. I did run into processor limitations pretty early on, I would say, in the creative process. However, up until the silicone based Macs, I would frequently run into processor issues with Ableton and have to stop what I'm doing, break my flow, um, and do administrative tasks and things to mitigate resources. And so this wasn't new to me, but I've been working on a silicone based Mac for a couple years now, and it, I had kind of forgotten how nice that how nice we have it and how lucky we are lately to be able to make music on a computer that literally doesn't force you to stop and do anything in the middle of your creative juice, which is pretty sweet. So I started a project on the standalone push in Europe, and I got to a certain wall. Had to open it on the computer and continue to flesh it out and do some things. Fleshed it out on the computer, did some administrative work, and it was able to get it to open back up on the push if I froze a bunch of tracks, flattened some things. You guys know how to do this, I think. So anyway, alternate story. Prior to push releasing the third generation, prior to Ableton releasing the third push, I started a project on my silicone-based Mac. First time in years that I've been able to open a new Ableton session, start a project with an idea, and really flesh it out to a complete track without stopping to do the administrative work that we just talked about earlier, which is pretty cool. So I was excited to see like how do I take this fully fleshed project that I've started without Push 3 and get it to load on the Push 3 and standalone with no hiccups so that in theory, fast forward 6 months or a year, I can take a bunch of my projects that I can only play on the computer, open them in standalone, and jam them out on stage next to a DJ set or alongside another one of my songs or whatever. So it's a lot of background, but I think you guys can all relate and you've probably been there. So here's what I have. My best so far that I can come up with. Step 1, commit as much of your MIDI to audio as you can. You've heard it before. People far smarter than me, far more successful in music have said this to you. They've said it to me a million times. I've easily watched 10,000 hours of YouTube videos on music production, so I speak from the crowd, but commit as much to audio as you can. And so my rule of thumb is 1 or 2 synths if they're an Ableton stock synth, which I know will run smoothly on the standalone version. I might leave one of those in synth mode or MIDI mode. I might leave 2 of them in MIDI mode. Alternately, if you're going to really commit to audio, you could just commit everything to audio, including your main synths and your bass lines and all those things. And you could just use like a Ableton stock plugin on those channels, like a filter, or you could, use the push live to feed some send to like a dedicated reverb or dedicated delay bus. You could do a variety of like the one knob from Elephant. I made my own like DJ kind of live performance effects rack, which has, I don't know, like a low, mid, high EQ on the first three knobs, and then the fourth knob is like a fade to black. So, those are more performancey things for like the drums necessarily, but I would say for my synth line, if I had a really quality filter on there, even just an EQ8 that you could sweep, that's something. If you combine that with a reverb, you can do something with your synth. It's not exactly the same as opening the filter on your synth live, but it does give you some flexibility, and you can do that on a strictly audio track. So, hope that helps. Step 1, commit to audio as much as possible. Okay, step 2. Now, depending on how you work, the way that I wrote this is to go from session to arrangement and then go back from arrangement back to session. Some of you start your songs in arrangement and you write linear from start to finish. That's probably a pretty normal way for brains to work. Mine doesn't work that way. So I do everything in session view from moment one. I start with clips, I build scenes, which is probably why I love Ableton. When it first came out, I realized, like, oh crap, I can make audio Legos with this thing, and that's how my brain works. I make audio Legos. I eventually arrange them into different combinations, and use the capture and insert scene function quite a bit to kind of turn my happy accidents into scenes. And then the way that I write to the arrangement, which is probably not the most efficient, but it works, is to just hit global record and I start triggering clips and scenes and using different features and stopping clips in real time until I'm happy, until I have 5 or 6 minutes of music that I like. And so now I'm in arrangement mode. So I flip tabs and I spend time in the arranger. And what I found over time is that if you go from clips and scenes into arrangement view, however you get there, once you're in arrangement view, you can then fine tune automation, do different things so that each of those segments of your song have far more detail and nuance and layering. But when you're finished, what I now recommend is to go back in and make markers for each segment of your track and then use the capture and insert to new scene function from the arrangement view back into your scenes. So you end up with, at the top, maybe a bunch of scenes that were kind of your audio Legos. And then at the bottom, you have a row of 5 or 10 scenes that are like really detailed, really fleshed out, really nuanced, proper scenes. So that now when you trigger those in a line, it really plays like the full meat of your song. Okay. However you get there, session to arrangement, back to doing scenes from your completed arrangement. Okay. The goal here is just fully fleshed out song. Got it? Okay. Once you've done this, take a screenshot of your arrangement with all your markers. What I then recommend is to go to your export audio command. But before this, I would group your tracks in the way that you like. So I like to do things so that I have 8 major groups of sounds in my push when I play it live, right? For all tracks to be filled. And if that means for me, like grouping a bunch of synthesizers together, and it means all of my textures get grouped together. So sometimes that could be a bunch of high percussion. Sometimes it's a bunch of weird samples that I've high passed and done a bunch of things to. But, whatever it is, I end up with 8 total things. And so group them together first. And what I like to do is the export audio command, and then rendered track, I do selected tracks only. So for this to work, you have to go back before you hit the menu button and you have to select all the tracks, which includes group level for me. So I have like 2 or 3 groups and then 4 or 5 individual tracks maybe. I'll select all of those manually across the top, then go to export, selected tracks only. Make sure you have the whole length of the song. I depending on what you're doing, I usually just go ahead and include the return of master effects, but it's up to you. You could leave that off and you could easily start like your own simple mastering chain in the push. You could easily do all your effects in the push. Entirely up to you. So far, I'm leaving all of those on and just trying not to like overheat my tracks with too much reverb, right? I do not render as a loop. I do not convert to mono. I do not normalize. And I do it at like 48K and 24. That's just me. I like the Power 3 dither option because somebody on YouTube smarter than me said it's a good option and my computer's fast enough, so what the hell. So I do that, export it to an external drive. I'll get 8 different files because we talked about 8 total tracks. Now, armed with my screenshot in those 8 files, I open a new project on my computer, import all of those stems to different channels, make sure they're organized, color coded, kicks, and all the things are in the right place. And I always do them in the same order so that if I ever am on stage playing live, I can always know that my kick's on channel 1, for example. So anyway, whatever makes your brain happy, but bounce them all back to the arrangement window in your new project as audio. Now refer to your screenshot of your track broken up into pieces from the previous project, make the markers in the exact same spots. Now do the capture and insert scene from selection while you're in arrangement view. And that'll create, if you have 8 or 12 or however many segments of your song you've decided, you can one by one bounce those back over to your arrangement view in your new audio only bounced track. So this process, it takes me maybe 10 minutes, but when it's finished and you save that project and then you collect all and save and you select all 4 options, so you save all the samples, now you have a project that will completely open. You can save that as an Ableton pack. You can toss it on another computer and open it, or you can just drag it to your push browser. Now when you open that project, if we did everything correctly, then what you end up with is a project that plays completely like your original, sounds the same. It's just an audio only version. It's in 8 stem groups and everything's smooth. The only thing you have to remember is that in Ableton, you have to either disable the auto normalize long samples when you import, or either way, just make sure you go to each one of those samples, the big stems, before you start slicing and dicing them. Make sure you go click on every single file. I disable normalize. You can leave it on, but just make sure the tempo is correct and make sure your project tempo matches. Otherwise, what you find is that it sounds very wonky. That was my first issue. So make sure if you're going to normalize them, that you do it to the correct tempo. Make sure the track at the top matches the tempo of the project, and make sure your samples all match that same tempo. If you do this wrong, it's going to sound goofy. If you do it all correct, step 7, 15 minutes later, is to jam out on your push. Cool. So let's check it out. So here's what your track looks like once you've imported all of your stem files. Again, you export all 8 selected tracks, follow the settings we talked about, which I can actually show you what it would look like right here. We would grab all these, file, export audio video. This would be, if this was still my MIDI version that we talked about earlier, it would be the same exact process. Selected tracks only, set your range. I would select on for this one, as we talked about, return and master effects. I will not normalize. I will not do any of the other things. I'll do 48K 24. I'm not going to dither. I would hit export. We would come back a few minutes later and we would have essentially just a bunch of stems on a hard drive. And then we would go to file, create new live set. And then we would just go find all of our stems, which we can go in here and just find something. I don't have a stems folder. We would just go get a bunch of stems from our hard drive, and we would drag them over to Ableton. And when you're dragging them over to Ableton, if you hold down the command button, instead of all those samples dragging into one track, it'll drag into new tracks for every single one. And what you'll get is something that looks like this, but it won't have these markers. So this has already been done, but all you do is find a spot, you right click, add a locator, and you name it. So there's testing. There's a locator, right? Once you have a locator, if this is my region right here, or if this is my region, doesn't matter. I can grab one, drag over. If you just make sure your sound card's on, you can just make anything you'd like. So we'll grab this testing region right here. It won't work on the right click for some reason. Maybe if we go to this view. Nope. Okay. So go to create, consolidate time to new scene. And what you would see is a quick context menu, and then right here, it just created this new little menu. Boom, done. So you'll do that times all of your scenes. Then you'll go to collect all and save. Select all 4 boxes, hit OK. Now you have everything in audio format, and you can verify by looking at all your tracks. And once you see that, you can go to your browser. You can find your push. If it's on here, it'll show up. You can just drag the file straight into the browser. That's it. Okay, so in our live browser, we were connected to our push on the same Wi-Fi network. We just, drag the file over to the push. It copies. There's plenty of instructions for that all over the internet. Just do that quick process. And then in your browser, you can open up. You can find sender for push. However you want to label your thing is fine. Quick second, it's loaded. There's that fade to black. Gain, low, mid, high, fade, high pass, all the things that I said I would put in there. Idea. Now you're standalone pushing. Enjoy.